The rain had been falling on San Diego for 3 hours straight, a rare occurrence that seemed to mirror the weight pressing down on Lieutenant Commander Marcus Axe Thompson's chest. He stood at the window of his hotel room, staring out at the gray expanse of the Pacific Ocean, his reflection a ghost superimposed over the churning water. He had been retired from the Navy SEALs for exactly 11 months, and every single day felt like an exercise in learning how to breathe underwater without gills. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks ago, a thick cream-colored envelope with raised lettering that felt foreign in his calloused hands. It was for the annual Navy Ball, a fundraiser for Gold Star families. He had almost thrown it away. These events were pageantry, a world of dress blues and champagne flutes. See, a stark contrast to the world he had inhabited for 20 years, a world of sand, blood, and the kind of silence that came before a breach. But his former commanding officer, a man named Bill Reynolds, who had been like a father to him, had called personally. "I need you there, Marcus. It's important. There's someone I want you to meet." The vagueness of the request had irked him, but you didn't say no to Bill Reynolds. Not ever. Now Marcus adjusted the black bow tie in the mirror. His hands, steady as a surgeon's when threading a charge or stitching a wound in the field, fumbled with the silk. He looked at his face. It was the same face that had stared back at him from 1,000 puddles in 1,000 God-forsaken villages, but the eyes were different. They were heavier. They had seen too much and, since retiring, they had found too little to replace the void. He was a weapon without a war, a medic with no one to save. The grand ballroom of the Hotel del Coronado was a sea of navy, blue, and white. Metal-adorned chests glittered under the crystal chandeliers, and the hum of polite conversation mixed with the clinking of glasses. Marcus moved through the crowd with the practiced invisibility of a man who had spent decades in the shadows. He nodded at familiar faces, accepted a firm handshake from a few old teammates, but he didn't stop. He was looking for Reynolds. He found him near the bar, a stout, white-haired bull of a man in a perfectly tailored uniform. "Marcus," Reynolds boomed, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. He pulled Marcus into a bear hug, a gesture of genuine affection that made Marcus's throat tighten. "God, it's good to see you, son. How are you holding up?" "Good, Bill. Keeping busy," Marcus lied, the words automatic, a shield he had perfected. Reynolds studied him for a second, his eyes missing nothing. "Busy is good. But that's not why I asked you here." He placed a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder and turned him slightly. "See that woman over there? The one talking to the Admiral's wife?" Marcus followed his gaze. She was standing by the grand piano, a petite woman with dark hair pulled back in an elegant twist. She wore a simple black dress, a stark contrast to the glittering gowns around her, and on her left breast, pinned with quiet dignity, was a small gold star pin. The Gold Star. It meant she had lost a husband or a son in service, but it wasn't the pin that made Marcus's blood run cold. It was the uniform she was standing next to. It was a dress uniform, sharply pressed, displayed on a mannequin as part of a memorial tribute, and on the shoulder of that uniform was a unit patch he knew better than his own face. It was the emblem for a specific Army medical unit, a unit that had been embedded with his SEAL team during the worst months of the Ramadi deployment in 2006. The year everything went wrong. The year of the IED that had torn through their convoy, the year he had worked for 18 straight hours in a combat support hospital, his hands wrist-deep in wounds, fighting to save the men he called brother. The year he had failed to save one of them. A violent shudder ran through him, so powerful he had to lock his knees to keep from staggering. The room seemed to mute, and the sounds fading into a dull roar as a slideshow of images flashed behind his eyes. Heat, screaming, the smell of burnt diesel and copper. He wasn't in the ballroom anymore. He was back there. He was the medic, and he was losing them. "Marcus! Marcus!" Reynolds's voice was sharp, urgent. "You okay?" You look like you've seen a ghost. Marcus blinked, the ballroom swimming back into focus. He was clammy and cold. I'm fine, he rasped, the lie tasting like ash. He couldn't take his eyes off the patch. That patch represented a specific place and time. It represented a face he had tried for 18 years to forget. A young army medic, barely old enough to drink, who had worked alongside him in that hellish hospital. A kid with gentle hands and a fierce determination who had helped him pack wounds and whisper lies of hope to dying men. And a kid who, in the chaos of that night, had simply vanished from his life. It's just the patch, Marcus finally said, his voice low. Reynolds looked at the mannequin and then back at Marcus, a flicker of knowing in his eyes. The old 807th? Rough days. He squeezed Marcus's shoulder. Go get some air. I'll find you later. But first, go talk to her. Who? The woman. Her name is Sarah. Her husband was an army doc. KIA in Afghanistan 5 years ago. Reynolds's voice was gentle. She runs the Gold Star program now. I thought maybe you two would have something to talk about. She understands loss, Marcus. Maybe more than most. It was the worst possible suggestion. The last thing Marcus wanted was to talk to a stranger about loss. But Reynolds had already melted back into the crowd, and leaving him alone with the ghost of the patch and the woman in the black dress. He didn't know why he walked toward her. His legs seemed to move on their own, a force of will that had nothing to do with his brain. As he got closer, he could see her more clearly. She was younger than he expected, maybe late 30s. She had a kind face, but her eyes held the same weight he saw in his own mirror every morning. She was listening politely to a story from an older woman, nodding, but her gaze seemed distant. He stood a few feet away, waiting. He wasn't trying to be rude. He simply couldn't form a coherent sentence. When the older woman finally excused herself, Sarah turned, and her eyes met his. She didn't offer the automatic bright smile of a socialite. She looked at him, really looked, and her expression was one of quiet recognition. And she knew the look. She was wearing it herself. Ma'am, Marcus started, his voice a low gravel. I'm sorry to intrude. Bill Reynolds. He suggested I introduce myself. I'm Marcus Thompson. Her eyes flickered down to the small seal pin on his lapel, then back to his face. Sarah Brennan, she said, her voice soft but steady. Bill speaks highly of you. He said you were one of the best. Marcus shifted on his feet, uncomfortable with the praise. Bill is too kind. There was a pause, a heavy silence that wasn't awkward but filled with the unspoken. He gestured vaguely toward the mannequin. That patch, the 807th. I served alongside some of their guys in Ramadi. 06. Something shifted in Sarah's eyes. A flicker of surprise, maybe, or a deeper recognition. Ramadi was brutal, she said quietly. My husband was there, with the 807th. Same time. The air left Marcus's lungs. The coincidence was too sharp, too precise. It was like a sniper's round hitting its mark. Your husband, he repeated, the words thick in his mouth. Was he a medic? She nodded, a small, sad smile touching her lips. Yes, Captain David Brennan. The name hit him like a physical blow. David, the kid, the one with the gentle hands and the picture of his new wife tucked into his helmet liner. The one who had looked at Marcus with terrified, awe-filled eyes as they worked on a soldier whose legs had been shredded by shrapnel. Hold pressure here, Marcus had yelled at him over the roar of generators and the cries of the wounded. Don't let go. You save his life by not letting go. And the kid had held on, his hands shaking but his jaw set, until the bleeding stopped. He had saved that soldier's life. Marcus remembered the kid's name now, remembered it with a clarity that was blinding. David. Doc Brennan. I know that name, Marcus whispered, the confession torn from somewhere deep inside him. He wasn't looking at her face anymore. He was looking at the patch, at the past. I served with him. He was just a kid, a hell of a medic. Sarah's composure, so carefully maintained, cracked for just a second. Her hand flew to her mouth. You knew David? I worked with him. One night, one long, terrible night. Marcus's voice was hollow. There was a mass casualty event. Our convoy was hit. They brought everyone to the CSH. It was chaos. David was there. He was scared, but he didn't freeze. He did everything I asked him to. Everything. He saved a man's life that night. I remember thinking, this kid is going to be fine. He's got the right stuff. He finally looked at her, and what he saw shattered him. Tears were streaming silently down her face, but she wasn't making a sound. She was just standing there, absorbing the gift of a story about her husband, a story she had never heard. He never talked about it, she breathed. He never talked about any of it. He came home, but he was different, wounded in a way the doctors couldn't see. He tried so hard to be okay. For me, for our little girl. But the guilt, the memories, they ate him alive. When he was killed in Afghanistan, part of me felt like he'd been dying slowly since Ramadi anyway. She looked at Marcus, her eyes pleading for something, understanding maybe or confirmation that her husband's pain had been real. Was he brave, Marcus? Was he really brave? The question was a knife to Marcus's heart. He thought of the kid, barely 22, with a tremor in his hands but fire in his soul. He thought of the vow they had all made, the oath to save lives and how often they failed. He thought of his own silent war, the one he was losing in a hotel room in Coronado. The bravest men I know, Marcus said, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, aren't the ones who aren't scared. They're the ones who are terrified, who do the job anyway. David was terrified that night. But he didn't run. He stayed. He saved a man's life. He paused, the weight of his next words nearly crushing him. I was the senior medic. I was supposed to be the one in charge. But that night, he taught me something about quiet courage, about just holding on. He stopped. He couldn't say more. The memory was a physical pain in his chest. He had carried the guilt of that deployment for 18 years. The faces of the ones he couldn't save haunted his dreams. And here, standing before him, was the widow of a man who had helped him try. A man he had failed to keep in touch with, failed to check on, failed to save from the long, slow death of the soul that happened after the guns went silent. Sarah reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was surprisingly strong. You didn't know, she said, as if reading his mind. You couldn't have known. We were all just trying to survive. They stood there, two people bound by a ghost, holding hands in the middle of a glittering ballroom. The music played, the laughter continued, but for them, time had stopped. And Marcus looked at the gold star on her dress, then at the patch on the uniform. The silent and the wounded. The ones who came home in boxes, and the ones who came home hollowed out. I should have found him, Marcus finally said, the words a confession. After. I should have found all of them. Sarah squeezed his hand tighter. You found me, she whispered, and you told me he was brave. You have no idea what that means. You have no idea. For the first time in 11 months, the weight on Marcus's chest eased, just a fraction. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't healing. It was the simple, profound connection of shared pain. The SEAL medic, rigid with the shock of recognition, had finally found a wound he didn't have to bandage alone. It was the wound of memory, and in the eyes of a stranger who was not a stranger at all, and he had found the only medicine that could ever touch it, the truth.